Welcome to today's Snap session, Summer is Coming, the Key to Safely Reopening Amenities, brought to you by Butterfly MX. I'm Jessica Fior, Managing Editor of Multi-Housing News, and I'm talking with Steve Ruff, Regional Manager at Waterton, and Cyrus Claffey, founder of Butterfly MX, to discuss how to safely and effectively reopen amenities such as pools and gyms when it is safe to do so. Before we start, please note that we're going to leave some time at the end of the session to answer your questions, but you could submit them at any time using the control panel on the right. Also, we'll be recording this, so it'll be available later for viewing. Thank you for joining us today, Cyrus and Steve.
Thank you for having us.
Sure. Before we begin, I'd love for everyone to meet you. Steve, could you give a brief intro?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Steve Ruff. I'm the Regional Manager at Waterton for our Chicago region. For those of you that don't know, Waterton is a real estate investment and property management company with a focus on multifamily, senior living, and hospitality properties. In my role as regional manager, I oversee all operations of our multifamily properties here in Chicago, which range in size from 81 units at the smallest property to 2,346 units at our largest property.
Wow, awesome. And Cyrus, could you give a brief introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jessica and Steve. Great to be here with you on this call discussing amenity spaces. So Butterfly MX is the creator of the Smart Intercom. Hopefully most of the folks on the call have heard of us or might be using us. And our platform consists of a touchscreen at the front entrance of a building that allows visitors to make a video call to our residents' mobile app to let the visitor in. You know, the mobile app also allows residents to let themselves into the building without using a key, using wireless technology like Bluetooth and NFC. And we also have a partnership with Amazon that provides an end-to-end package delivery solution. And of course, you know, in these days of stay at home where people are ordering everything online, that's turned out to be quite a critical thing to have in place. You know, I guess lastly, we're one of the founders of the kind of the whole prop tech movement that's kind of emerged in real estate in the last 5 years. And today we serve about 500,000 units coast to coast and a few internationally as well.
Great. So as some states are slowly reopening and multifamily communities are starting to get their amenities back in order, especially as the warm weather is coming and people are really antsy to get out of their apartments, Steve, what do you consider some of the key things to think about before reopening amenities?
Yes, this is obviously a hot topic, no pun intended with the weather changing. But our only priority here when opening amenities is the health and well-being of our associates and our residents, and that's our main focus. We're closely, obviously, monitoring federal, state, and local governments to ensure that we're following all of their guidelines, which include a reduction in capacity. We're currently working on opening our outdoor amenities first as permitted, and we'll then refocus on opening the office to the residents and prospects. We're anticipating the outdoor spaces opening over the next several weeks. We're legally allowed to, and we'll do our best to open our amenity spaces, our other amenity spaces, as quickly as possible after restrictions are lifted. However, as stated, our main priority here remains the health and well-being of our associates and residents in each property.
Oh, of course. And Cyrus, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, look, you know, we serve about 4,000 buildings, right? And so at BMX, we've been thinking a ton about this because a lot of our customers have come to us asking about whether we can help. And I think it's a really kind of a critical problem to solve because, you know, the residents want to get back into the amenity spaces and the owners like Steve and at Waterton, you know, they're trying to do it safely. You know, I think for us, there's really three considerations that we think can help reopen spaces successfully. So the first is it's really the ability to set maximum occupancy levels. You know, on the prep call that we had with Steve, you know, he said that they're thinking about starting at 25% of the pre-COVID occupancy levels, right? So that's the maximum number of people who can get into a space at any one time. So how do you monitor that? And I think then the next thing is, you know, you need to be able to monitor density and trigger notifications to staff and residents with respect to whether there's availability to get into the amenity space, right? And then, what does that do? It means that you have to have a way to restrict people from getting in once those occupancy levels have been reached. And then that also helps drive your cleaning strategy. How intensely do you need to clean a space is all going to depend on how many people were in there. And then lastly, if you're able to monitor that and kind of track what's going on, that's going to help you with contact tracing in the event that anybody at the property turns out to have tested positive.
And you mentioned limiting the capacity. You could monitor it. Are there ways to enforce this? How would you, tell people not to go in or deal with people who are, maybe angry about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, from our, again, from our prep call, I think it's something you don't want to kind of anger people. You need to be very concerned about how you treat residents, right? I think the thing is that you use things like scheduling tools to basically let people know that a maximum capacity has been reached during a set period of time. That's the strategy that we're really kind of working on implementing using Butterfly MX and kind of a new product and partnership that we have coming out in response to this demand. I think as Steve said, again, I don't think you want to kind of send out a negative message. It's more about capping the number of people get in using scheduling tools.
Sure. And Steve, of course, you mentioned keeping residents safe. What are some new safety procedures property managers might start needing to consider?
Yeah, the main thing to consider, is supplies. And all of us, even as a consumer, experienced this drought when several months ago with different forms of sanitization or cleaning supplies or just your normal household supplies. And we will only reopen our spaces once we can be sure that we have enough supplies to maintain the amenities in a sanitary condition. We're working closely with all of our supplier partners to meet our supply needs as quickly as possible. Also, as stated, we'll also be reducing capacity in these spaces. At Waterton, we're focusing on 25% of the normal capacity to ensure that we're operating within proper distancing and to comply with all the guidance.
That seems like a great strategy. And how will you both be letting residents know? What's the best way to let residents know about these changes? How do you communicate?
Yeah, and as most of the country moved to shelter in place over the last few months, we've closed our management offices and leasing offices for appointments and meetings. We've remained fully staffed to answer questions via phone and email, but we've relied on technology to get out these updates and changes. And I think most of the country, most markets are relying on technology to get this out. This includes, sending push notifications out through our property apps, posting messages on the screens and elevators, or sending out a mass communication email through our customer management email software. To fully operate within the guidelines of the social distancing, electronic communication and technology is going to have to play a major role. I think you'll see less paper being exchanged for notices and updates, exchanging from hand to hand, and more emails and posts to avoid that physical contact.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. I think everything's becoming electronic because that facilitates social distancing, obviously. I think in today's world, there are a myriad of screens now in buildings like Butterfly X at the front entrance, where a lot of our customers have used our screens to communicate messages about hours of operations or other critical updates and messages that they want residents to see as they come and go into the building. I think obviously you also have things like package room screens or transit info screens that can also help kind of communicate critical messages to people. So as they go about the building, they're seeing all of this. And I think, obviously if you've invested in some sort of digital signage platform, this is an opportunity to really take advantage of it. And, unlike kind of, I think, posting paper in the elevator, a digital signage platform allows you to easily update it, often from even a central corporate headquarters location, so that you have consistency of messaging across your platform. And one of the great things is, you don't need to have your access control guy come on site and do anything to make updates.
Oh, that's great, and I like what you said about consistency. Excuse me. That's so important to have the message be consistent across your properties and to all your residents. Are there any process changes, Steve, that you're considering making, and do you think they'll be long term or just now during toward the end of shelter in place?
There's a lot of changes that we're making here. And during this phased reopening, our amenities will be limited to use by residents only, and guests will be welcome back at a future date. So by limiting the number of guests, that's going to allow our residents to enjoy these amenities and start to open them back up and restrict the access. And we'll ask the residents electing to use the amenities to strictly follow the social distancing standard prescribed by CDC or their local governments and maintain that 6-foot distance. In some cases, we could implement a reservation policy. This could be applied to items such as grills, lounge areas, even fitness equipment that may require reservation prior to using this space. This is just one way that we can control the occupancy and obviously maintain that proper distance. As far as long term, it's really hard to say how long these changes will take place, and I wish I had that answer. We'll continue to follow the government and the health guidelines as we move forward. I think it's safe to say that over the last few months, all of us have experienced a very significant change in our daily lives, and the term new normal is often used, and at this point, I don't think any of us can really pinpoint what that new normal will be.
New normal is just chaos, I guess.
Yep.
Cyrus, do you have any thoughts on how, I know Steve mentioned the amenities will only be open to residents as opposed to guests. Are there any technology aspects that could help property managers who might be implementing something similar?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that this is, really the moment for things like cloud-based access control and IP access control to shine, because it really allows you to control your building from a centralized web dashboard. You can do it at the property management level, but the property manager can also do that remotely from an offsite location. I know that a lot of properties were able to shut down their amenity spaces, lock their front entrances of the building, really like instantaneously by using IP-based access control systems like Butterfly Max or Brevo, because you could simply just log into a web-based dashboard and do that. I think as we reopen, it's going to be an evolving situation, as Steve mentioned, and so that nimbleness of being able to kind of update the occupancy levels as things progress over time, increase them, decrease them, just depending on kind of the local situation, is going to be extremely valuable for properties in order to ensure and maintain safety. And again, it also helps you monitor the room occupancy levels as well. So you have real-time data coming back to you, and if those levels get exceeded, you can act as a property. And again, using things like schedulers help you kind of create social distancing where, only 10 people can go into a certain area at a time. Once those number of like reservations for 10 people have reached, then you can no longer get into the space, and tying that back into your access control system is going to be something that's going to be extremely valuable to people. And if, again, you can do that nimbly, then you're able to make changes on the fly, right? So I think that those are very important considerations. I would just add that, as properties and the listeners on the call look at investing in different technologies, you want to think about what benefit does it have today in the COVID times, but also what's it going to do for the property post-COVID, right? And the best technologies will be able to play a kind of significant, impactful role both today and also in the future as we move out of this.
Is there any example of technology that would be good for now and later, further on, that people should consider?
Well, again, like, look, IP access control platforms or cloud-based access control platforms are really something, some people have already started to invest in that because it gives them the ability to control different individual door setup times when, for example, in an amenity space, it's during normal times, it's open from, let's say, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., right? And the door is always open. In COVID times, you're now locking it down because you don't want anybody going in there, right? And you're doing this all from a centralized dashboard. Now, as we reopen, you're going to layer in scheduling into that time when it's open to create maximum occupancy levels and control that, again, without having to have a staff member on site, kind of with one of those counters that you see people at like a football stadium counting people going in. You can do all of this using technology. It doesn't take up staff time. Staff is only notified when certain levels get exceeded, and that's really the solution that we've been working at Butterfly MX to roll out in concert, with all of our customers.
That's great. And I like that it limits staff usage as well. I think, it's important to consider, of course, always think about the residents, but, we need to keep our employees healthy and safe as well. So that's great that there are technologies that consider both. Steve, I was wondering, how are you hearing about resident buy-in? Are they looking for these changes? Are they angsty? What's going on with the residents?
I think everybody's getting anxious to get out. The weather's changing, and we, in most places, have been shelter in place, and they're looking for places to go. And typically, your community is, open, and you can get out and enjoy the amenities. So I think a lot of residents are definitely anxious to get the spaces open. However, they are wanting to do so in a manner that operates within the guidelines. So I don't think opening them with limiting the occupancy is going to be any issue. I know we look to technology a lot for during this social distancing time, but we also are going to be removing equipment or seating. That's going to also help us maintain these occupancies. So in a pool area that typically has 100 spots, say, we're reducing down to 25. So if we had 100 chairs or 100 lawn chairs out there, we can reduce that down to 25 and space those out, which would allow us to operate within the guidelines. And then we rely on technology to use for reservations, possibly even for pool chairs, to help spread that out. So I think everybody's looking forward to getting these spaces open. However, everybody wants it to be done safely.
Of course. And back to technology, are there any new uses for the technologies we have that could help streamline the process or help with the opening of the amenities?
As I said, it's just a simple reservation system. The system we use, we can do it all online. So from their resident portal app, or from signing on to their app on their phone, or signing in online, we can offer reservations. Typically, those may have only been for a party room or a suite rental, but now we can open that up, and it could possibly be used for chair rentals out by the pool. We could set timelines. We can set restrictions on how many they can reserve in a week. There's a lot of restrictions that we can use with the current technology that we have, just applying it to more broad categories.
Right, and that's basically, Jessica, where something like an IP-based access control system then comes into play, because we're getting a data feed from the reservation system. And once you've kind of maxed out on the number of available reservations, then you can no longer enter the space. And one of the things we're doing at Butterfly MX is incorporating that into kind of the ability for the resident to open and close various doors for themselves in the property. And if they want to make a reservation and get into, let's say, the gym, they'll be notified, sorry, max level of occupancy already exceeded, please select another time. So it's kind of an interesting new approach in terms of how to use existing access control technology to achieve the social distancing aim that we need to have in order to reopen all these spaces.
Sure. Well, that's all very interesting. I hate to cut off the conversation, but I would like to allow some time for questions from the audience. So let me get to the first one. This is a question for Steve. How do you ensure a reservation or any other precautionary policies adhere to without constant physical monitoring during open hours where controlled access technology is limited or not possible?
Yeah, and I think the second part of that question is where it gets difficult. And, I had a conversation with Cyrus a little bit yesterday. To control an area without a limited access or controlled access device, it does get a little tricky, especially after hours. Most of those amenities are, they may have to be closed down when there's nobody to monitor the usage of them. We will be looking to technology, as Cyrus has mentioned in several of his comments, to help develop this. Right now, a simple access control of having a key fob or not wouldn't really limit the number of people coming in. As mentioned, there's going to be ways in the future that you can set the number of key fobs to be used when entering the space, and it will maintain that occupancy for you. Now, even those systems aren't 100% if the door is left open or such, but there is a challenge when there isn't the technology available. And unfortunately, if the technology is not available to restrict it, our main focus is the well-being of everybody, and we wouldn't want somebody to be overly crowded. So those areas that we can't restrict or off hours would have a slightly different schedule of reopening.
Yeah, hey, Jessica, just to add to that, I think the takeaway from Steve's comment is, like, if you don't use technology, then it becomes very much black and white. In other words, I need to have on-site staff. When the on-site staff is not there, I just have to keep the space closed, right? So again, I think that kind of underscores the need to implement some of these platforms. I think the other thing that's very interesting is that, the systems that people look at, and this is just kind of a word of advice again to all the listeners, is like you see kind of a whole new breed of access control platforms coming into the residential real estate space. And one of the things about those that kind of distinguish some from the others is some are very easy and intuitive to use and very much focused on ease of use from a property manager's perspective, and others are not, right? So as you assess different systems, you really have to look at how intuitive is this for my on-site staff to use. Can it be used remotely, right? And that would typically mean that it's cloud-based, right? So I don't even need to be on site in order to affect these changes, right? And get notifications. So, because everybody knows property managers, they're constantly being kind of given new software tools. Some of them are not intuitive, and that means they just don't get used, and it's not effective in achieving the ends that the people making that investment at the corporate level had hoped for.
Great. Next question. Can you talk more about the tech and ease of implementation?
Yeah, look, I think that's another important point, which is you have to assess whether the technology you're bringing into a property can kind of sit on the existing infrastructure that you have in place. For example, we have a new smart keypad that's coming out. It's designed to really replace a traditional key fob reader, right? But you don't need to rewire anything in order to use it. So I think as you look at kind of implementing new technology, you should see like how much infrastructure requirements Do you have to, or how many infrastructure upgrades do you need to make in order to implement this? Is it wireless based? Do you have a Wi-Fi network in your amenity space where you can bring in sensors that basically can communicate with the Wi-Fi network, or do you need to run new wires in order for these sensors to work, right? So it's these types of considerations that will really drive how much investment is necessary, how quickly you can implement these things, right, in order to start getting the benefits from it. And I think, again, the ease of implementation should be a key consideration in terms of how people assess new technologies that can help with monitoring occupancy and kind of helping affect social distancing in their amenity spaces and really throughout the building.
Sure. How do you feel about imposing fees if occupancy regulations are not adhered to?
So are you referencing fees to use the space, or are you referencing like a penalty fee if somebody is using the space over occupancy?
My feeling for this question is penalties, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I would, at this point, we're hoping that there's no penalties. Obviously, things are changing, and so, the National Apartment Association could change their guidelines on their lease documents, which are what a lot of companies use, that could implement fees for, or could implement occupancy rules. As leases don't necessarily contain the language right now, but they do contain language regarding around the amenity space and the rules and regulations. So I don't anticipate that fees will be issued to residents not following the guidelines. We hope that we're able to open the spaces and still operate within those guidelines, and hopefully we're starting out at 25%, but we're unsure on what the future holds on the occupancy levels.
Yeah, Jessica, I would just add that, like, what's key here is again, you want to avoid having to ask people to leave an amenity space, and the way you do that is, I think, by elegantly kind of restricting access getting in, right, so that you avoid that whole issue on the back end. And you can use technology, right, like the scheduling tool, paired with an access control system, like an IP-based access control system, to basically say, hey, look, you've maxed out on the amenity space, pick a different time to reserve going into the room, right? And that way, people have the opportunity to use it later, and they're not going in when they shouldn't be there, and then running into kind of any sort of need to be asked to leave.
That makes sense. And I believe we have time for one more question. Steve, this one's for you. Will you be able to do the same thing for the smaller properties as the larger? For example, do they all have the same access, or do properties that are smaller just get a scaled down message based on what amenities they only have?
The message will obviously be tailored to what amenities are available for the property. Our message to our properties from a company as Waterton is one message, though. We're tailoring our rollout based off of the amenities that are there, as well as the state and local government restrictions. Now, it's still going to be an occupancy based and space driven rollout, and our focus on all properties are still focusing on the outdoor properties. It's obviously, the more people that you have in a specific property, you're going to reach your limits a lot sooner. But there is going to be no difference between how we're rolling this out between any of our properties, big or small. The main thing is what amenities are there and what are the local and state restrictions. As I said, we operate across the country, and so I'm based here in Chicago, so my restrictions are going to be slightly different than those properties out west in the California region.
Okay, well, that definitely makes sense. Unfortunately, we're out of time right now. Steve and Cyrus, thank you so much for your time today. This is a really interesting conversation.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Jessica.
having us. This was great.
Yeah,
Great, of course.
it was.
And I hope everyone tunes in again next week, and every Thursday we have a snap session on MHN and our sister publication, Commercial Property Executive. And I want to thank, again, our sponsor, Butterfly MX, and thanks to the audience for joining us today. Take care, everyone, and stay safe. Thanks. Bye.